The bank called and said hundreds of thousands were vanishing from my accounts. 30 minutes later, I realized the thief wasn't a stranger. It was my own blood. I didn't confront him. I didn't panic. I stayed silent, gathered proof, and let him believe his plan was working, because the next move wasn't mine. It was already waiting for him. Before I tell you exactly how I discovered the truth, and how quietly I dismantled everything he built, do me one small favor. Support stories like this by following the channel and dropping a comment with where you're watching from. It helps these stories reach people who may need them more than they realize. The call came at 10:17 a.m. on a Tuesday that looked exactly like every other day of my retirement. I was sitting in the spare bedroom of my home in Redwood Hills, a quiet suburb outside Brighton City, reviewing invoices for small advisory firm I still ran part-time. Officially, I had retired from accounting 2 years earlier. Unofficially, numbers were still the only thing that kept my mind sharp. "Mr. Calder," the woman said, her voice polite but strained. "This is Eleanor Price, branch manager at Union Crest Bank. We flagged some activity on your accounts that doesn't align with your usual patterns." I remember gripping my pen a little too tightly. Patterns were my life. I built my career detecting when they broke. "What kind of activity?" I asked. There was a pause. "I'd prefer to discuss it in person. How quickly can you come in?" 25 minutes later, I was seated across from Eleanor in her glass-walled office. I'd known her for over a decade. She didn't waste time. "In the last 6 weeks," she said, sliding a folder across the desk, "a total of $368,000 has been transferred out of your business and personal savings accounts." The room went very still. "That's impossible," I said calmly. "I haven't authorized anything close to that." She turned her monitor toward me. Line after line appeared, dates, amounts, destinations. Clean, precise, efficient. All transactions were executed using your verified credentials, she added carefully. Correct device signatures. Correct login behavior. Someone who knew me. The receiving entity was listed at the top of every page. Hawthorne Ridge Holdings. The name hit me like a quiet punch to the chest. I didn't react. I didn't raise my voice. I asked for printouts. "Everything," I said. "Every transaction. Every linked account." Eleanor nodded. "We've frozen your accounts and issued a fraud alert. But I need to be honest. This will be complicated. Whoever did this had deep access. I already knew who it was. Evan Calder. My younger brother, 6 years younger, always charming, always helpful. After our parents died, we'd grown closer. He'd helped me move files to cloud. His son, Liam, handled my home network, my password manager, my online banking setup. They framed it as concern, helping an aging brother navigate modern systems. I thanked Eleanor, collected the folder, and drove home in silence. I didn't call Evan. I didn't call Liam. Confrontation would only make them erase tracks they didn't yet know I could see. Instead, I did what I'd done for 40 years. I documented. I photographed my computer setup, took screenshots of every login, every saved credential. I cloned my hard drive. Then I made one phone call. "Raphael," I said when he answered, "I need forensic help." Quietly. Rafael Mendez had been my colleague for 3 decades. He retired early and now did discreet forensic accounting for law firms. If anyone could untangle this, it was him. He arrived that evening with 2 laptops and no small talk. Within an hour, he leaned back in his chair. "This didn't start 6 weeks ago," he said. My jaw tightened. "For the last 18 months, small amounts were siphoned out. 50 here, 200 there. Just enough to stay invisible. They were testing access." He traced the flow. Hawthorne Ridge Holdings funneled money into 3 shell entities. From there, it went into commercial real estate. 2 properties in Mesa Vale, 1 in Silverreach, all registered under Evan's name. Then Raphael pulled up something that made my stomach go cold. A durable power of attorney, filed 7 months earlier. My signature, perfectly forged, granting Evan authority over my finances in the event of incapacity. That was right after your knee surgery. Raphael said quietly, "You were on pain medication. He had access. I stared at the screen. There's more, Raphael added. Emails. Evan had been corresponding with a lawyer about initiating guardianship proceedings. The language was clinical, strategic, describing my decline, my confusion, my increasing inability to manage assets. He was planning to erase me legally. I stood up and walked a window, hand steady, heart furious. What's the move? I asked. Raphael didn't hesitate. We build an airtight case, and we let them think they're winning. The next morning, I underwent a full cognitive evaluation with Dr. Helen Rowe, a neuropsychologist known for court testimony. 6 hours of testing. Memory, logic, pattern recognition. Her conclusion was sealed and unmistakable. No impairment whatsoever. Evidence piece 1. By afternoon, my attorney Claire Whitman filed an emergency injunction. All assets tied to Hawthorne Ridge Holdings were frozen. That evening, Evan called me. Hey, brother, he said, feigning concern. Got some weird notice from the bank. Accounts locked. Everything okay? I smiled to myself. Yeah, I said lightly. Probably just routine security stuff. Let me know if you need help, he added quickly. Liam's great with his tech side. I'm sure he is, I replied. 2 days later, Evan made his mistake. He attempted to activate the forged power of attorney, claiming I was experiencing a sudden medical crisis. Claire responded within hours, submitting Dr. Rowe's evaluation, the transaction trail, and Raphael's forensic report. The court scheduled an emergency hearing, and that was when Evan finally realized something was wrong. I walked into that courtroom clear-eyed and calm. The judge reviewed the documents in silence. Then she looked directly at Evan. This power of attorney is invalid, she said, and there appears to be evidence of significant financial misconduct. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. As we exited, Evan tried to stop me. Rob, I can explain. I turned once. You already did, I said, with every transaction. I walked away, and that was only the beginning. The courtroom emptied faster than I expected. Lawyers packed files. Clerks whispered. Chairs scraped the floor. Evan stood frozen for a moment, like a man who had misjudged the depth of water and stepped forward anyway. Liam wasn't looking at me. He kept his eyes on the tiles, jaw tight, hands clenched. I walked out without looking back. Outside, the late afternoon sun felt sharper than it should have. Claire fell into step beside me, her voice low. This is going to move fast now. The injunction rattled him. Try to activate that document was desperation. He thought I was still confused. I said, that's the problem with liars. They believe their own version. My phone buzzed before I reached the car. A text from an unknown number. Evan, we need to talk. This has gone too far. I didn't reply. Instead, I drove straight to Jennifer's house. My daughter lived in Laurel Bay, a coastal town an hour south, where the air always smelled faintly of salt and eucalyptus. She worked long shifts as a pediatric nurse, juggling 2 children, and a life that didn't leave room for drama. Evan had always been the good uncle, the one who showed up with gifts, fixed her Wi-Fi, helped her with online banking when she complained about passwords. I sat across from her at the kitchen table and told her everything. I didn't soften it. I didn't skip details. I showed her the bank reports, the forged documents, the emails about guardianship, the properties bought with my money. She stared at the screen, color draining from her face. No, she whispered. Uncle Evan wouldn't. I turned the laptop slightly and pointed. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled. Then she went still. Dad, she said quietly, David Liam helped me set my accounts last year. I didn't answer. She opened her laptop, logged in, and checked. It took 12 minutes. That's all it took for her entire understanding of the last year to collapse. Small transfers. Perfectly timed. Never enough to raise alarms. Money siphoned from her children's college fund. She covered her mouth with her hand. I thought I was just bad at saving, she said, voice breaking. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. This ends now, I said, for both of us. That night, Claire expanded the injunction to include Jennifer's accounts. The judge signed off without hesitation. By morning, Evan and Liam were locked out of everything. And that's when the pressure started. First came the calls. Evan left 3 voicemails, his tone shifting from concerned irritation to anger. Liam sent messages full of confusion, pretending he didn't understand what was happening. Then came the narrative. Claire forwarded me screenshots from social media. Subtle posts. Carefully worded. Family disputes are hard. Trying to protect someone who won't accept help is heartbreaking. Some people can't admit when they're struggling. They weren't defending themselves. They were planting doubt. Let them, Claire said. Public opinion doesn't matter. Evidence does. 3 days later, the district attorney's office opened a formal criminal investigation. Raphael's forensic report made it simple. The money trail was clean. The forged documents were obvious. The emails discussing guardianship crossed from civil fraud into criminal conspiracy. Detectives seized the properties in Mesa Vale and Silverreach. One was mid-renovation. Another had tenants. None of it mattered. It all froze. Evan showed up at my house that evening. I watched him through the window as he stood on the porch, adjusting his jacket, rehearsing words he'd planned to use for years. Just not like this. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. "Rob," he said, forcing a smile, "this has gotten out of hand. You forged my signature," I said evenly. "You stole from me. You tried to have me declared incompetent." His face hardened. "I was trying to help," he snapped. "You don't understand how bad things were. The debts, Liam's loans. I was drowning. So you decided to push me under instead." I replied. He took a step forward. I didn't move. "Give me time," he said. "I can fix this. I'll pay you back." "You already fixed it," I said, "for the prosecutors." His eyes flicked past me into the house, searching for something. Weakness, maybe. "You're really going to do this?" he asked. "We're family." "Family doesn't draft paperwork to erase you," I said quietly. He left without another word. 2 days later, Evan and Liam were arrested. Wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, conspiracy to commit elder financial exploitation. The mugshots surfaced within hours. Jennifer called me in tears, not for them, but for what they'd done. "I trusted them," she said. "I let them near my kids. They counted on that." I said, "That's how predators work." The arraignment was short. The evidence overwhelming. Evan's wife, Marissa, sat behind him, stunned. She hadn't known. The investigation confirmed it. She believed the businesses were legitimate. Another casualty. The trial date was set for 12 weeks out. During that time, I rebuilt everything. New devices, new accounts, new security. A complete digital teardown. I slept better than I had in months. The trial itself was methodical. Raphael testified first, walking the jury through every transaction, every pattern, every deliberate choice. Claire dismantled the defense argument piece by piece. Then I took the stand. The defense tried to paint me as confused, forgetful, overwhelmed by modern systems. I looked directly at the jury. "I spent 35 years detecting fraud," I said. "I didn't miss what my brother did. I trusted him. There's a difference." For hours of deliberation, guilty on all counts. Evan was sentenced to 8 years. Liam to 6. Restitution was ordered, though most of the money was gone. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked if I felt vindicated. I said no. I felt finished. Months later, I sold my house in Redwood Hills. Too many memories. Too many echoes. I moved closer to the water, to a smaller place where the nights were quiet and the air was clean. Jennifer and the kids visited every weekend. One evening, she asked me if I regretted not handling it privately. If I had, I said, they would have done it again. Maybe to you. Maybe to someone weaker. She nodded. "I'm proud of you," she said. That was enough. The letter from Evan arrived a year later. Apologies, regret, promises of change. I read it once and put it in a drawer. Some things don't need answers. What mattered was this. I wasn't erased. I wasn't silenced. I wasn't broken. And the people who tried to take everything from me lost the one thing they thought I would never use against them. Clarity. The silence after the verdict was heavier than the courtroom itself. No cheers, no gasps, just a low scrape of chairs and the murmur of people realizing something irreversible had happened. Evan didn't look at me when the judge finished reading the sentence. Liam did once, just once, and whatever was in his eyes wasn't anger. It was disbelief, like he had convinced himself this was a bluff right up until the moment the door slammed shut. I didn't stay to watch them be led away. Outside, the air felt different, not lighter, clearer, like the pressure system had finally shifted after a long storm. Claire walked beside me down the courthouse steps. "The civil recovery will take time," she said. "The properties are already tied up. We'll claw back what we can." "I know," I said. "That part doesn't matter anymore." She stopped walking. "It should. It's your money." I looked at her. It was never just about the money. She nodded slowly. She understood. That night, I slept without locking my bedroom door for the first time in months. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. No dramatic confrontations. No sudden apologies. Just a gradual unwinding of a life I hadn't realized was knotted so tightly. Jennifer struggled more than I did. She blamed herself for trusting them, for letting Liam near her children, for not noticing the missing money sooner. I reminded her over and over that trust isn't flaw. It's a weapon in the wrong hands. Bad people don't look like villains. I told her one afternoon as we sat on my deck overlooking the water. They look useful. The fallout spread wider than I anticipated. Evan's name disappeared from boards and committees almost overnight. People who'd shaken his hand at fundraisers suddenly remembered appointments elsewhere. Marissa filed for divorce quietly. The house they bought with stolen money was seized. She moved into a small rental near her sister and stopped returning calls. Liam's girlfriend left town within a week of the sentencing. Her social media vanished. I didn't blame her. The real damage wasn't visible. It was reputational, permanent, and yet the strangest part was how calm I felt. I kept waiting for anger to return, for grief, for regret. None of it came. Instead, I felt something closer to distance, emotional altitude, as if the betrayal had burned through something old and brittle and left behind only what still mattered. I hired a new IT firm, one with no family ties, no history, no favors. They rebuilt everything from scratch. New hardware, new networks, multi-layered security that required physical authentication. The consultant, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and no patience for excuses, asked me once why I wanted so many redundancies. "Because I won't mistake familiarity for safety again," I told her. She smiled. "That's usually learned the hard way." I started speaking at local community centers at Jennifer's urging. Small groups at first. Seniors, retirees, people who thought fraud meant strangers calling from overseas. I told them my story. Not names, not details, just the truth, that the most dangerous thieves are often already inside your life. That access is worth more than force. That manipulation rarely starts with money. It starts with help. After one talk, a woman in her 70s approached me with tears in her eyes. "My nephew handles my bills," she said. I thought it was a blessing. I gave her my card. Within a month, I'd helped 4 families uncover similar patterns. Smaller amounts, same methods. It was never dramatic theft. It was erosion. That's when I realized what Evan and Liam had done wasn't rare. It was practice. The consulting work followed naturally. Law firms, financial advisors, even banks asked me to review internal protocols for elder account protection. I said yes selectively. Not for the money, for the leverage. Jennifer called me one evening, her voice unsteady. "Dad, Liam tried to contact me." "When?" "Today, through an old email address. He said he was sorry. Said he didn't know how it got this far." "And what did you do?" "I deleted it," she said. Then I cried for 10 minutes. Then I felt lighter. "That's how you know it was the right choice." I said. I received another letter from Evan 6 months later. Longer this time. More introspective. He blamed pressure, fear, pride. I read it slowly. folded it, and placed it back in the envelope. Some apologies aren't meant to heal the recipient. They're meant to quiet the sender. On my 65th birthday, Jennifer threw a small dinner. Just family. Real family. The kids made cards. One of them drew a picture of me standing very tall next to a house with a lock on the door. "What's that?" I asked. "That's you not letting bad guys in anymore," my grandson said. I laughed harder than I had in years. Later that night, alone on the deck, I thought about the version of myself from a year ago. The man who believed longevity equaled immunity. The man who thought love and loyalty were the same thing. They aren't. Love requires boundaries. Loyalty requires proof. I didn't become cynical. I became precise. That was the difference. When the restitution finally came through, partial, delayed, stripped of its original promise, I donated most of it. A local legal aid group, a fraud awareness nonprofit, a scholarship fund Jennifer helped me set up for children affected by financial abuse in families. The money felt better in motion than it ever had sitting still. One afternoon, nearly 2 years after the trial, I ran into Evan's old colleague at the grocery store. He hesitated before approaching me. "I just want to say," he said carefully, "you did the right thing." "I know," I replied. He looked relieved. That was the last time Evan's name came up in my life. I never blocked his number. I didn't need to. Silence had already done the work. And the truth was simple, even if it took years to fully accept. They thought my age made me weak. They thought familiarity made me blind. They thought patience meant passivity. They were wrong on all counts. What they never understood was this. I wasn't fighting to punish them. I was fighting to keep my life intact. And I did. Time has a strange way of exposing what adrenaline hides. In the months after the trial, people kept asking me how I felt. Relieved, vindicated, satisfied. I gave polite answers, but none of those words were accurate. What I felt was steadiness. A flat, grounded sense that nothing was vibrating under my feet anymore. No hidden trapdoors. No quiet hands moving money while I slept. That steadiness changed how I moved through the world. I stopped rushing. Stopped apologizing for asking questions. Stopped mistaking politeness for obligation. The version of me that used to soften every edge, smooth every conflict, assume good intentions by default. That man didn't disappear, but he learned restraint. Jennifer noticed first. "You don't explain yourself anymore," she said one afternoon while we were walking along the harbor. "I explain when it's useful," I replied, "not when it's expected." She smiled. "I'm learning that too." Her life had shifted in quieter ways. She closed accounts Liam had once helped with, opened new ones with multi-factor verification, taught her kids why passwords mattered. She stopped downplaying her instincts. Watching her reclaim that confidence felt like a second victory layered over the first. The consulting work grew without me advertising it. Word spread the way it always does. Through whisper recommendations, through lawyers who'd seen too many cases dismissed because victims didn't have documentation, through families who'd learned too late that trust without oversight is just exposure. I didn't take every case. Some people wanted revenge. Some wanted absolution. Some wanted me to tell them their suspicions were wrong, so they could keep living comfortably in denial. I only worked with people who were ready to see the truth, even if it hurt. Raymond stayed involved. He loved the work, loved peeling back layers of deception the way other men love crossword puzzles. We made a good team, methodical, unemotional, relentless. One case stuck with me. A retired teacher, 72. Her niece had been helping manage her pension. Small withdrawals over 5 years. New car. Condo in another state. The woman hadn't wanted to believe it. Kept saying, she wouldn't do that to me. They never say I didn't see it. They say I trusted her. When the evidence became undeniable, the woman didn't cry. She laughed. A short, hollow sound. "I thought being careful my whole life meant I was safe," she said. I told her what I'd learned the hard way. Being careful keeps strangers out. It doesn't stop family from walking through open doors. The niece was charged. The money partially recovered. The teacher sent me a handwritten card afterward. She thanked me not for the legal help, but for treating her like someone who still had agency. That mattered more to me than any fee. The world hadn't become darker. I just learned where the shadows actually lived. I moved 6 months later. Sold the old house. Too many memories layered into walls. Too many rooms where trust had once lived unquestioned. I didn't want to keep defending territory that no longer represented who I was. The new place was smaller, intentional, clean lines, no guest room by design. Anyone who stayed would do so because they were invited, not assumed. On my first night there, I slept with the windows open. Nothing felt exposed. That winter, I received word that Evan had been denied early release. Good behavior wasn't enough to offset the scope of the damage. The judge cited prolonged abuse of trust in the ruling. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt closure. Liam tried again, through an intermediary this time, a former mutual friend who thought reconciliation might bring peace. I told him to pass along a message. Peace isn't something you ask for after you destroy it. That was the last outreach. I never hated them. Hatred requires emotional proximity. They lost that privilege the moment they decided my life was an asset to be stripped rather than a bond be honored. Spring came quietly. Jennifer's kids grew taller. I learned which coffee shop knew my order without asking. I started volunteering twice a month at a local legal clinic, sitting with seniors who felt embarrassed for needing help. I made a point of saying the same thing every time. You didn't fail. The system failed to expect betrayal from a familiar. One afternoon, while organizing old files, I found a notebook from the year before everything unraveled. Pages filled with reminders, password hints, investment notes, names I trusted implicitly. I flipped through it slowly. Some names were crossed out now, not in anger, just finality. I shredded the notebook and started a new one. This time, it didn't list people. It listed principles. Access is earned, not gifted. Trust requires visibility. Love does not excuse oversight. Age does not equal surrender. I didn't become isolated. I became deliberate. That distinction saved me more times than I can count. On the anniversary of the verdict, Jennifer invited me to dinner. No speeches. No toasts. Just food, laughter, kids arguing over dessert. As I watched them, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to think before. I wasn't lucky. I was prepared. Prepared because I'd learned. Because I'd acted. Because I refused to collapse into shame when the truth came out. People often say betrayal hardens you. It doesn't. It clarifies you. It shows you exactly what you're willing to lose and what you'll defend without compromise. Late that night, back at my house, I stood on the balcony and looked out at the quiet street below. Lights off, doors locked, a peaceful kind of stillness. For the first time since everything began, I didn't feel like I was recovering. I felt like I was building. And nothing, no blood tie, no shared history, no carefully practiced smile, would ever get past the foundation again. And the first sign that the story wasn't finished came quietly, the way real consequences always do. It arrived as a letter. No return address. Postmarked 2 states away. Inside, a single sheet of line paper, folded twice. Evan's handwriting. Older, less confident than I remembered, but unmistakable. He didn't ask for forgiveness. That surprised me. Instead, he wrote about time, about silence, about how prison strips noise away until all that's left is memory. He said he replayed moments he dismissed as insignificant. Conversations where I trusted him, dinners where he'd laughed too loudly, the afternoon he'd reset my banking credentials and joked about me being old school. He wrote that he finally understood something. You never treated me like a liability, the letter said. I treated you like one. There was no apology that mattered, just acknowledgement, and something colder beneath it, a recognition that what he'd lost wasn't just freedom, but position, access. The role he'd assumed was his by default. At the bottom of the page, one final sentence. Michael still thinks you overreacted. That one stayed with me, because it explained everything. Michael didn't write. He didn't have to. His silence was his message. The letter went into a drawer, not as leverage, not as evidence, as a marker. Proof that even when consequences arrive, accountability doesn't always follow. The legal aftermath continued in ways the headlines never cover. Restitution hearings, asset liquidations, quiet settlements negotiated behind closed doors. The court ordered repayment schedules that would take decades to fulfill. Numbers written into documents that everyone understood were symbolic. You can't return trust on a payment plan. What surprised me was how many people came forward afterward. Former clients of Michael's consulting firm, business partners who'd noticed irregularities but dismissed them, a woman who'd co-signed a loan after he'd assured her it was temporary, an elderly couple whose investment portfolio had slowly drained while reports showed market fluctuations. Patterns don't emerge until someone forces them into the light. The district attorney asked if I'd be willing to testify again, this time in a related civil case. I agreed, not out of obligation, but because I knew something most victims don't realize at first. Your silence doesn't protect you. It protects the system that failed you. The courtroom felt smaller the second time. Less spectacle, more fatigue. Michael sat at the defense table, shoulders slumped, eyes avoiding mine. He looked older, smaller, like a man who'd spent his life outsourcing responsibility, and finally ran out of people willing to carry it. When I spoke, I didn't raise my voice. I explained systems, controls, trust relationships. I described how financial abuse isn't always loud. It's incremental, relational, disguised as help. I told the judge something that had taken me months to articulate. The most dangerous fraud isn't theft. It's dependency. When someone makes you believe you can't function without them. Michael looked up at that, just for a moment. Then the case ended the way these cases usually do. Partial judgments, long appeals, the slow grind of accountability, diluted by time. But something shifted afterward. People stopped asking me how I felt about what happened. They started asking how to prevent it. I was invited to speak at community centers, financial literacy workshops, even a regional conference on elder protection. I never used my story as a centerpiece. I use it as a framework. Here's how access becomes exposure. Here's how good intentions become blind spots. Here's how to design systems that protect dignity without stripping autonomy. After one talk, a man in his late 70s approached me. He shook my hand longer than necessary. My son handles my accounts, he said. I'm going to change that. I didn't ask why. That summer, Jennifer went through something of her own. Her ex-husband filed for a modification. Child support, custody adjustments, vague claims about instability. It wasn't serious, but it was familiar. She called me late one night. I hear your voice in my head now, she said, asking for proof. I smiled into the phone. Good, I said. That means you're listening to yourself. We went through the documents together. Cross-checked timelines. Verified claims. The filing collapsed within weeks. She didn't celebrate. She exhaled. That was when I realized something important. This wasn't just about what had been taken from me. It was about what had been returned to the people around me. Clarity, confidence, boundaries. In early fall, Raymond retired for real this time. Sold his practice. Bought a place near his daughter. We met for lunch before he left town. You know, he said, stirring his coffee, most people your age would have folded. Quietly. Tried to keep the peace. I almost did, I admitted, but you didn't. No, I said, because peace built on denial isn't peace. It's postponement. He raised his cup. To inconvenient truths. We didn't stay in touch daily after that. Some relationships serve a purpose, then release you. That's not loss. That's completion. The second letter arrived 6 months later. This one was from Michael. 3 pages. Neatly written. Defensive in places. Self-pity threaded throughout. He blamed stress, debt, poor advice, Evan's influence, my unwillingness to handle things privately. He never used the word wrong. I read it once. Then I burned it, not in anger, in closure. Winter returned. Quieter this time. I spent more evenings alone, not lonely, just unoccupied. I read. I cooked meals that took time. I learned to enjoy silence without filling it with justification. One night, As I was locking up, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. Older, yes, but steadier, more present. I thought back to the man I'd been before the bank call. The version of me who believed longevity equal immunity, who thought good character insulated you from harm. That man hadn't been naive. He'd been incomplete. Experience had filled the gaps, not gently but effectively. In January, I was asked to consult on a case that mirrored mine almost exactly. Same pattern, different family. The victim hesitated, didn't want to ruin lives. I told him something I'd learned too late. They already decided your life was expendable. You're just choosing whether the truth survives. He filed charges. Spring approached again. A full year since the verdict. I didn't mark the date. Didn't need to. Some stories end with reconciliation. Others with punishment. Mine ended with alignment. My life matched my values again. Nothing hidden. Nothing outsourced blindly. Nothing left unsecured because it felt uncomfortable to ask. People think justice is loud. It isn't. Justice is quiet systems working as intended. It's doors that don't open without permission. It's trust that survives scrutiny. One evening, Jennifer's youngest asked me why I always double-check things now. I crouched down to his level. Because care means paying attention, I said. And paying attention keeps people safe. He nodded like that made sense. It did. By the time summer arrived, the last of the appeals had been denied. The case files closed. The headlines moved on. I didn't. I kept building. Not walls, but structures. And nothing in my life would ever again depend on someone else's integrity without verification. Because trust is a gift. And gifts, once broken, must be earned back, piece by piece, under the light. By the time summer fully settled in, the noise was gone. Not the external kind, the sirens, courtrooms, arguments, but the internal static that lingers long after betrayal has been exposed. That low-level vigilance, the sense that something else might still be hiding in the margins. I woke one morning and realized I hadn't checked my accounts compulsively in weeks. The habit had faded without ceremony. That was how I knew the damage had finally stopped spreading. I didn't expect what came next. It began with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Old instinct. But something in me, curiosity, maybe closure, answered. The voice on the other end was hesitant. Female. Tired. Mr. Mitchell? My name is Carol. Michael's wife. She hadn't contacted me once during the trial or sentencing. Not a text. Not a letter. I assumed that silence was either shame or strategy. I was wrong. I know you don't owe me anything, she said quickly before I could respond. And I won't ask for forgiveness. I need to tell you something. And I didn't know who else should hear it. I listened. She told me about the months before everything collapsed. About the pressure Michael had been under. About debts she hadn't known existed until collectors started calling their house. About how he'd insisted everything was under control. How he blamed market conditions, business partners, timing. He kept saying you were fine, she said. That you trusted him. That this was temporary. I closed my eyes. She continued. David wasn't supposed to be involved at first. Michael pulled him in later. Framed it as helping family. As protecting you from yourself. There was again that phrase. Protecting. I didn't believe it, she said quietly. Not fully, but I wanted to. Because believing him meant I didn't have to ask harder questions. Her voice broke then. Just slightly. I lost everything too. I didn't interrupt. She told me about selling the house. About moving into a one-bedroom rental near her sister. About starting over in her late 50s with no savings. And a last name that suddenly carried weight she couldn't escape. I'm not calling for help, she said. I won't ask you for that. I just needed you to know you weren't blind. You were targeted. That mattered more than she knew. After the call ended, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the same mug I'd used that morning. It struck me then that there were victims no one would ever name in this story. People collateral to the choices others made. That realization didn't soften what Michael had done, but it completed the picture. A month later, I received a subpoena. Not for Michael's case, but Evan's. He had agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for a reduced sentence. The prosecution wanted me to testify about system access, shared credentials, the moments where trust had been leveraged. I agreed. Walking into the courtroom again felt different this time. Less personal, more procedural. Evan sat at the defense table, thinner than before, his confidence stripped down to something raw. He didn't look at me until I took the stand. When he did, his eyes filled, not with anger, but with something closer to regret. I testified calmly, precisely. No emotion, just facts. Yes, he had access. Yes, I trusted him. Yes, he knew how the safeguards worked and how to bypass them. The prosecutor asked one final question. Mr. Mitchell, if you had known then what you know now, what would you have done differently? I didn't hesitate. I would have designed systems that didn't depend on loyalty, I said, because loyalty isn't control. Evan flinched at that. The sentence came down 3 weeks later. Reduced, but still significant. Enough time for reflection. Enough to ensure distance. That night, Jennifer came over with the kids. We ordered food, spread papers across the table, homework, drawings, the small chaos of ordinary life. At one point, she caught me watching them and smiled. "You okay?" she asked. "Better than okay," I said, and I meant it. Later, after the kids had gone to bed, she asked the question I knew had been waiting. "Do you miss him?" she asked. "Michael." I thought carefully. "I miss who I thought he was," I said, "but that person doesn't exist anymore. Maybe never did." She nodded. "People keep telling me I should forgive," she said, "that it's healthier." I met her eyes. "Forgiveness is an amnesia," I said, "and it isn't access. You can forgive someone and still lock the door." She smiled at that, not because it was clever, but because it was permission. That fall, I moved again. Not far, just enough. A smaller house, fewer rooms, more light. I chose it deliberately. Nothing hidden, nothing excessive. Every system rebuilt from scratch. No shared credentials. No informal access. No assumptions. The consultant I hired asked if I wanted redundancy. "I want transparency," I said. "Redundancy comes after." One evening, while unpacking, I found the old folder I created at the beginning of all this. Screenshots, notes, timelines, proof. I almost threw it away. Instead, I scanned it into an encrypted archive and labeled it clearly, not as a reminder of pain, as documentation of survival. Near the end of the year, a letter arrived from the district attorney's office. A formal notice informing me that restitution payments would be minimal. Most of the money was gone. Assets liquidated. Debts prioritized elsewhere. I read it without reaction. Money was never the point. I'd already been paid back in something far more valuable. Clarity. One December morning, while walking along the coast, I realized something else. I wasn't angry anymore. Not numb. Not resigned. Just done. Anger requires energy, investment, attention. I'd reclaimed all three. On my 66th birthday, Jennifer surprised me with a small gathering. No speeches. No toasts. Just people who knew the whole story and stayed anyway. At one point, Raymond raised his glass. "To the man who reminded us that age doesn't make you weak," he said. "It just makes your enemies underestimate you." Everyone laughed. I didn't, because it was true. Late that night, after everyone left, I sat alone on the porch, listening to the ocean. I thought about how close I'd come to losing not just money, but autonomy. How quietly it could have ended if I'd trusted silence over instinct. I thought about Michael in his cell, Evan in his, the years they'd traded for something they never got to keep. And I felt no triumph, only distance, which I realized was the real freedom. I went inside, locked the door, and turned off the lights. For the first time in a long time, I slept without dreaming. The encounter I didn't expect came on an ordinary afternoon, which is how these things always happen. I was standing in line at a small neighborhood grocery store, the kind with uneven floors and handwritten signs, thinking about nothing more serious than whether I needed milk. The cashier was chatting with the woman ahead of me, complaining about the heat, about how summer seemed longer every year. Then I heard my name. Not loudly, not confidently, just carefully. I turned. He stood 2 places back. Thinner than I remembered, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes uncertain. His hair had gone mostly gray in the years since I'd last seen him. Not from age, but from compression. The way time collapses when consequences finally catch up. For a moment, neither of us spoke. People think they know how these moments feel. They imagine anger, shouting, tears. They imagine some dramatic confrontation that finally releases everything bottled up. That isn't what happened. What I felt was distance. Not physical, emotional. As if he were standing behind glass. "I didn't know you lived around here," he said. I nodded. That felt like enough. He shifted his weight, glanced at the floor, then back at me. I wasn't sure if I should say anything. "You already did," I replied, evenly. The line moved forward. The cashier rang up another customer. Someone laughed nearby. Normal life continued. "I just wanted to tell you," he said, lowering his voice, "that I understand now." I studied him, not unkindly, but without curiosity. Understanding, I'd learned, often arrived late and demanded credit hadn't earned. Understand what? I asked. He swallowed. That it wasn't just about the money. That what I took wasn't just from you. I waited. "I took certainty," he continued. "I took your sense of safety. I took your place in your own life." That surprised me. Not because it was eloquent, but because it was accurate. "And," I said. He flinched, like he'd expected absolution and found neutrality instead. "And I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he said quickly. "I'm not asking for that. I needed you to know that I see it now." The cashier called my total. I stepped forward, paid, took my bag, and turned back to him. "This conversation," I said calmly, "is for you, not me." He nodded slowly, as if that hurt more than anger would have. "I figured," he said. I hesitated, then added one thing. Only one. "Seeing it now doesn't undo choosing it then." He closed his eyes briefly. "I know." That was the moment. The one people imagine matters most. It didn't. I walked out. In the car, I sat with the engine off for a minute, letting the air settle. I wasn't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. There was no surge of emotion waiting to be processed. What I felt was confirmation. The story had ended already. This was just an echo. Later that week, Jennifer asked why I seemed lighter. Because nothing new could be taken from me anymore, I told her. She didn't ask me to explain. That autumn, I turned down 2 speaking invitations. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd said what needed saying. Repeating it wouldn't deepen the truth. It would only rehearse it. I focused instead on quiet systems, on routines, on the architecture of days that didn't depend on vigilance. Morning walks, cooking without distraction, reading books that had nothing to do with finance, law, or protection. At night, I slept without checking locks twice. That mattered more than anyone knew. One evening, Jennifer brought over an old photo album, pictures I hadn't seen in decades, family gatherings, vacations, smiles that hadn't yet learned caution. We flipped through it slowly. "Do you want to keep these?" she asked gently. I considered the question. "No," I said finally, "but I don't want to destroy them either." So we scanned them, archived them, preserved the record without preserving the illusion. History, I'd learned, didn't need to be rewritten, just contextualized. Near the end of the year, a letter arrived from the state notifying me that one final appeal had been denied. No more hearings. No more motions. Finality. I placed the letter in a folder labeled closed and slid it into the back of a drawer I rarely opened. Not hidden, just complete. On the anniversary of the bank call, I didn't mark the date, but I did notice something. I trusted myself again. Not blindly, not arrogantly, but fully. I trusted my instincts, my boundaries, my capacity to act when something felt wrong, even if it meant disrupting comfort. That trust was the thing they'd almost taken, and it was the one thing they failed to steal. One night, Standing on my porch, watching the lights of the neighborhood flicker on one by one, I realized something else. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I was defined by what I refused to become afterward. I didn't harden into bitterness. I didn't retreat into fear. I didn't confuse silence with peace. I learned, and learning, I discovered, was the quietest form of strength. When I went inside, I locked the door, not because I was afraid, but because boundaries are not reactions. They're choices. I turned off the lights and slept. What surprised me most wasn't how everything ended. It was how quietly it stayed ended. There was no final confrontation waiting in the wings, no last secret uncovered, no dramatic reversal designed to give the story a sharper edge. Life simply continued, and for the first time in a long while, it did so without demanding that I be on guard. That, I realized, was the real aftermath. Months passed. Winter softened into spring. Small changes became permanent, without me noticing the exact moment they settled in. I stopped scanning faces in public places. I stopped rehearsing explanations in my head for conversations that never happened. The constant internal audit, the mental habit of asking, "What am I missing?" faded into the background. Peace doesn't arrive loudly. It creeps in when you stop bracing for impact. One afternoon, while organizing documents in my office, I came across an old notebook. The first pages were filled with tight, frantic handwriting, dates, dollar amounts, arrows connecting names and accounts. The early architecture of survival. I flipped through it slowly, remembering the man who had written those pages. He'd been angry, focused, methodical, necessary, but he wasn't who I was anymore. I closed the notebook and slid it into a box marked archive, not to hide it, to place it where it belonged, in the past, not hovering over the present. That evening, Jennifer came over with the kids. They were older now, louder, more opinionated. Life had kept moving for them, as it should. My grandson asked me why I always drank my coffee on the porch in the mornings. "Because it's quiet," I said. He thought about that. "It's quiet inside, too," he said, pointing at his head. I smiled. "Yes," I said, "that's the good kind of quiet." Jennifer watched us from the doorway, something unreadable passing across her face. Later, after the kids were asleep, she sat beside me. "You know," she said, "I don't worry about you the way I used to." That mattered. "I worry about myself now," she added, "but in a good way." We talked for a long time that night, about boundaries, about how easy it is to confuse love with obligation, about how betrayal doesn't always arrive wearing malice. Sometimes it wears familiarity. She told me she'd ended a friendship recently. Someone who constantly asked for favors, access, emotional labor, but never reciprocated. "I heard your voice in my head," she said, not saying anything, just standing there. I didn't need to ask what she meant. Influence doesn't require instruction. One example is enough. A few weeks later, I received a notice that Evan had been transferred to a different facility. No explanation, no context. Just an update in a system that no longer involved me. I felt nothing. Not relief. Not resentment. Just distance. The chapter had closed without needing my approval. That summer, I traveled alone for the first time in years. Nothing ambitious. Just a quiet coastal town, long walks, unfamiliar routines. I didn't tell many people where I was going. Not because I was hiding, but because I no longer felt the need to narrate my movements. Autonomy, I'd learned, was deeply private. One afternoon, sitting at a cafe overlooking the water, I caught myself doing something I hadn't done in a long time. I was planning forward, not contingencies, not safeguards, not exit strategies, just plans. Books I wanted to read, a class I might take, the idea of mentoring young professionals. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to pass something on before it calcified into caution. That night, back in my room, I opened my laptop and drafted an outline for a small workshop series. Financial literacy, yes, but more than that, decision literacy. Teaching people how to recognize when trust turns into leverage. I didn't brand it, didn't promote it widely, just offered it quietly through a community network. People showed up, not crowds, Individuals, each one with a story that sounded uncomfortably familiar. A sister managing accounts. A son helping with paperwork. A business partner with too much access and too few questions. I didn't tell them what to do. I taught them how to see. And that changed everything. One evening after a session, a woman in her 70s stayed behind. "I thought this only happened to people who were careless," she said. I met her eyes. "It happens to people who trust," I said. "That's not a flaw. It's just something that needs protection." She nodded, tears welling, not from sadness, but relief. When I returned home, the house felt different. Not safer, just more mine. I'd rearranged furniture, removed things that had been chosen by committee rather than preference, simplified spaces until they reflected clarity instead of compromise. I realized in how often people design lives around accommodation. This one was built around intention. Near the end of summer, Jennifer asked if I consider moving closer to her. Not into her space, just nearer. I didn't answer immediately. The old me would have said yes out of obligation. The newer me considered alignment. "Maybe," I said, "if it makes sense." She smiled, not offended, relieved. That was progress. One night, sorting mail, I found a small envelope that had been misfiled months earlier. Inside was a receipt from the bank, dated the day everything began. The call, the discovery, the pivot. I held it for a moment, then I shredded it. Not because it hurt, because I didn't need it anymore. The story no longer required proof. By the time autumn returned, I realized something quietly astonishing. I hadn't told this story to myself in weeks. It had stopped being my defining narrative. It had become context, experience, something that informed, but did not dominate. That was when I knew the ending was close. Not because something dramatic was about to happen, but because nothing needed to. One evening, as the sun set earlier than it had just weeks before, I stood at the window and watched shadows stretch across the floor. I thought about all the versions of myself that had existed in this story. The trusting brother, the shocked victim, the methodical investigator, the witness, the survivor, and now, the man who lived with the knowledge without carrying the weight. I turned off the light, not because I was done seeing, but because I was done watching for threats in the dark. The final chapter didn't announce itself. There was no phone call, no letter, no unexpected encounter waiting to resolve the last loose thread. Instead, it arrived the way real endings do, through a gradual realization that nothing else was coming, and nothing else was needed. I understood that one morning while standing in my kitchen, watching sunlight move across the counter. It struck me that there was no tension in my body, no subconscious readiness for interruption. No quiet rehearsal of defenses. I wasn't bracing for the day. I was simply entering it. That awareness carried more weight than any verdict ever had. For a long time after everything happened, I believed closure was something you reach by confronting the past one final time, saying the right words, hearing the right apology, witnessing the right consequence. But closure, I learned, doesn't require participation from the people who harmed you. It requires permission from yourself. That permission came slowly, almost invisibly. It appeared in ordinary choices, the ones that once would have been shaped by caution or explanation. I stopped explaining myself, not out of bitterness, but clarity. When people asked why I no longer spoke to certain family members, I didn't offer context or justification. I simply said, that relationship ended. And that was enough. No one argued. No one pressed. The simplicity startled me at first. Then it grounded me. In late autumn, I received notice that Evan's final appeal had been denied. No fanfare. No follow-up. Just a confirmation that the legal system had finished speaking. I read it, folded the paper, and placed it with the others, not as evidence, not as memory, but as closure recorded. After that, there were no more updates, no more names to track. No more numbers to reconcile. No more energy to spend revisiting what could not be undone. The silence that followed was clean. One afternoon, Jennifer asked if I would tell the kids a full story someday. When they were older, I considered it carefully. Yes, I said, but not as a warning. as context. She nodded. That matters, she said. It did, because I didn't want a story passed down as fear. I wanted it passed down as discernment. There's a difference. Fear teaches avoidance. Discernment teaches choice. As winter approached again, I found myself thinking less about what I'd lost and more about what quietly expanded in its place. Time, not the amount of it, but how it felt, unrushed, undivided, unmanaged by anxiety. I began volunteering at a small financial counseling nonprofit twice a month. Nothing formal, just conversations. Listening more than speaking. People came in carrying shame heavier than debt. They whispered things they'd never told anyone. Not because they were foolish, but because they were embarrassed that trust had cost them something. I never corrected them. I reminded them of something I'd learned the hard way. Trust doesn't fail because it exists. It fails when it's exploited. And exploitation says more about the exploiter than the person who believed. Those conversations change people. They changed me too. Because every time I helped someone name what was happening to them, it reinforced something inside me. I had survived without becoming smaller. That mattered. As the year turned, Jennifer and I had a conversation that would have felt impossible before all of this. She asked me how I wanted my affairs handled someday. Not urgently, not emotionally, just practically. And for the first time, the question didn't feel threatening. We talked openly, carefully, with clarity instead of fear. I outlined boundaries, protections, structures, not because I expected betrayal, but because I understood prevention wasn't pessimism. It was stewardship. I don't ever want you to feel responsible for managing my life. I told her, I want you to feel free to live yours. She reached across the table and took my hand. I do, she said. That was everything. In early spring, I took one final step I hadn't realized I'd been avoiding. I deleted the archive folder from my computer, not the document stored elsewhere for record keeping, but the working file, the one I'd opened 100 times in the early days, the one that represented vigilance. I hovered over the delete key longer than necessary, then pressed it. The screen cleared. Nothing bad happened. No regret. No surge of memory. Just space. That was when I knew the story had released its grip. A few weeks later, I walked along the shoreline near my home, the wind cool and steady. I thought about the version of myself who'd once believed that loyalty was something owed automatically. I no longer believed that. I believed loyalty was something earned through consistency, transparency, and respect. And I believe it applied to myself first. There was no bitterness in that belief, only alignment. I'd often wondered, in the months following everything, whether justice would ever feel complete. Now I knew the answer. Justice isn't a feeling. It's a condition. A state where harm no longer has access. And that state had been achieved. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned the color copper, I sat alone on my porch and thought about how close everything had come to unfolding differently. If I'd ignored the bank call, if I confronted too early, if I'd doubted myself instead of the story I was being told, any one of those choices would have ended me quietly, not just financially, personally. Instead, I had chosen patience, precision, silence when noise would have served the wrong people. I hadn't acted out of anger. I had acted out of self-respect. And that distinction mattered. I finished my coffee and stood, feeling the ease of movement that comes from not carrying unresolved weight. Inside, the house was quiet. Not empty. Quiet. The good kind. I locked the door, not because I feared what might enter, but because the space inside was mine. Fully. Finally. As I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, a thought passed through me. Not heavy, not dramatic, just true. They thought I was an easy target. They thought age had softened me into someone pliable. They were wrong. Not because I fought harder than they expected, but because I refused to disappear quietly. And that refusal, calm, deliberate, unyielding, became the most powerful decision of my life. The story ended there, not with applause, not with revenge, but with something far more lasting. Peace. If my story made you pause, reflect, or see trust differently, take a moment to support the channel. Subscribe, Share your thoughts in the comments and let me know where you're watching from. Your engagement helps these stories reach the people who need them most.